Alrighty then, back once again for some more 3 Wishes the Cutie Mark Crusaders before they changed the world. Yeah, I know it's been a while and I'm truly sorry about that. It hasn't been for lack of wanting, let's put it that way. I've just been doing other stuff as well and it kind of kept getting procrastinated and that's my fault and I'm sorry. But I'm enjoying this and I'm looking forward to finally getting back into it. We should be hearing Scootaloo's origin now after hearing Sweetie Belle's and Apple Bloom's. So yeah, she came out and threw a bit of a strop because she wanted to know hers desperately while everyone else was being comforted by their family. And Rainbow stepped forward, so we're probably going to get her side of the story now. Alright. Well, so this was a ways back, right? When me and Flutters were still living up in Cloudsdale, I'd been out practicing as usual and was working on high-speed terrain following just outside of Ponyville. As I was dodging through trees and skimming over rivers, I started to get pretty hungry. You do not want to be going as fast as I do and hit a tree, so I can't afford to be distracted by hunger. Anyway, not too long before then, I'd found these awesome apple trees out on the edge of town, and I'd often stop by there and borrow a couple of apples for a snack. And yeah, I probably owe AJ a few crates of apples now that I think about it. At the time, though, well, I won't say I didn't know any better, but who was going to miss a couple of apples out of a whole orchard, right? So yeah, I zoomed through all the rows of trees across the farm and snagged a few apples to snack on, then set up shop in a tree for a nap. When I woke up, it was late afternoon, and I knew I had to be back in Cloudsdale for this evening class I was taking. And before you say anything, yeah, I was taking classes. Even some pony as awesome as me can't join the weather team without knowing at least a little bit of meteorology and stuff. Anyway, I was feeling pretty groggy after my nap, so I took the scenic route past the edge of Ponyville rather than zooming straight back into Cloudsdale. On the way I smelled like the most awesome thing ever. I slowed down and tracked it to these cupcakes sitting out on a window ledge. It was sticking out the back of this building in town, and so I pulled into a hover and went down to check it out. Turns out it was a bakery, that one before the cakes remodeled. And since I had a few bits to spare, I thought I'd get something, and the sugar rush could help keep me awake during class. Besides, my stomach wouldn't let me pass up a smell that good. I sat down and walked around to the front of the place, ready to go in, but the sign on the door said, "Be back later." I was all set to leave, but right as I dusted off, the breeze shifted and the smell of those cupcakes shot directly into my brain. It's a bakery, I thought. Who's gonna miss one cupcake? Now I realize I should have left a couple bits to pay for it or something, but I didn't think of that at the time. Instead, I just snatched one and took off. Not wanting any pony to see my free snack, I shot straight for Cloudsdale, figuring I could eat it in peace once I sat down on campus. From the angle I came in at, the first thing I hit on Cloudsdale was the park on the edge of campus. It's kind of shared with the town, so there are swing sets and stuff for falls, as well as a lot of benches and other grown-up park stuff too. It looked as good a place as any to eat a cupcake, so I landed and sat down on a bench near the swings. I was just about to take a big bite when I saw Fluttershy. She was over in the area usually meant for falls, and making something in the cloud box. Oh, right. So that's kind of like a sandbox, but for Pegasi. It's filled with specially sifted cloud stuff that holds the shape way better than most normal clouds. That makes it easier for foals to sculpt and build things with it. I was about to shout to her, but then I saw that she was looking sad. Well, even more sad than usual. You guys didn't know Flutters back then, but she had it pretty rough from the other foals when we were little, and well, it got better after she got her cutie mark, but still, with her shyness, you can imagine she wasn't exactly Miss Popular in college either. Anyway, my point is, she was looking even more sad than she usually did in those days. I may not have been the most honest-looking pony back then, but I like to think I was still the most loyal. I couldn't just leave her like that, and I did have a cupcake in my hoof, so I thought super quickly and realized I needed a unicorn. I saw a visiting professor walking across the far end of the park, so I zoomed over to him and asked him to relight the candle on the cupcake for me. He looked at me like I was a madmare for a second, but then just shrugged and the spark leapt from his horn to the candle. I zoomed back towards Fluttershy and yeah! So there's like one thing not awesome about being so fast. Anyway, he was nice enough to light it a second time as well, and I walked carefully back across the field to Fluttershy. "Hey Flutters, want a cupcake?" I said. She jumped and screamed. Well, quietly sort of kind of screamed. You know how she is. I guess I'd come up directly behind her, and with how awesomely careful I was being, I hadn't made any noise at all, so she hadn't realized I was right there until I said something. "Here," I said, shoving the cupcake towards her face. "Make a wish." She said that it wasn't her birthday or anything, but I was all, "When you know a pony as awesome as me, you don't have to wait for your birthday." Yeah, I know, that was pretty cheesy, but it's the thought that counts, right? Anyway, she blew out the candle and pretty much wolfed down the whole cupcake before I knew it. We talked for a couple of minutes and she seemed to cheer up, which made me feel better too, even though I didn't get any of the cupcake. Then I realized I was late for class, so I told her bye and took off. And that's pretty much it. "What do you mean that's it?" Scootaloo said, flabbergasted. "That still doesn't explain anything about me." Interjected Fluttershy. "Maybe I should tell my part now. If you all want to hear it." "Of course we want to hear it!" Scootaloo shouted as she put both front hooves on the table, leaning as far as possible towards Fluttershy. The filly's eyes were wide with determination, even though her voice sounded like it was about to give in to more sobs at any moment. "I've got to know what happened!" Fluttershy's eyes laid down and her pupils contracted as the obviously stressed little Pegasus invaded her personal space. She quickly regained her composure though and started recounting things from her angle. "Well, you see, it was like Dashy said. I was having a really rough day. My history professor had told me she was going to have to fail me since I'd been absent too many times. I tried to tell her that I'd never missed a class and that maybe I may have been too quiet during roll call what with so many other ponies around, so she probably didn't hear me. She told me that was my own fault then and went back to her paperwork. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't bring myself to actually say anything. She looked up and wanted to know if there was anything else, and I just mumbled, 'Thank you,' and backed out of her office. Inside, it made me so angry. I thanked her when she was failing me unfairly and even being rude about it. I hated myself for being so timid, but still I just hung my head and walked away. After that, I'd been late to remedial flight training, and it didn't go very well either. The coach yelled at me in front of every pony as soon as I flew into the gym, and that made all of them look right at me. I couldn't stand them staring like that, so I looked away, but then I couldn't see where I was landing and ended up tripping over my own hooves and falling over. Even in a class full of bad flyers, they still all laughed at me. Then even the coach, asking why I was late, called me Miss Cluttershy, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I burst into tears and went galloping out of the gym. I didn't care if I failed that class too at that point. I just had to get away from every pony looking down at me, so I ran to the biggest open space I could find, which was the park. It was the middle of the day, so there weren't any foals around, but there were college students and faculty using the trotting paths and such. I ended up in the playground because it was the farthest I could get from every pony. I wasn't in any mood to swing, so I just sat down in the cloud box, crying softly to myself. After a while, I started tracing my hoof around in the cloud stuff, making little repeating patterns, watching it fall off my hoof when I held up a clump, and just doing anything to take my mind off all the mean ponies. I'm not sure exactly what led me to start building something, but I think it was mostly just something to occupy my hooves and mind. Before I knew it, though, I'd formed a crude little cloud pony. I started talking to it, or really to myself, I guess. I told it about the things that always went wrong for me, and how I hated being so timid and a bad flyer. The interesting thing was that it, kind of started to help me feel a bit better. As I continued putting details on it, I started thinking how nice it would be to have a real friend that I could talk to, one who was like me. So as I modeled the cloud pony more, I started adding details. I decided she should be a Pegasus like me. She'd be lonely too, feeling outcast like I was. I gave her really small wings as well, because she'd be bad at flying like me. I thought that if I had someone just like me, they'd really understand all the problems I had, and I was making an imaginary friend to match. Then Rainbow Dash snuck up behind me and I nearly jumped out of my skin. When I finally caught my breath, she was standing there beside the cloud box, looking a bit embarrassed and holding out a cupcake in one hoof. It was pink, covered in frosting, and had a single lit candle on it. Then Dash told me to make a wish. I was really confused, as I had no idea why she'd give me a cupcake like that. I thought maybe she thought it was my birthday, and tried to apologize if I told her the wrong date. That's when she said, "When you know a pony as awesome as me, you don't have to wait for your birthday." I know you think it sounded cheesy, Dashy, but it really touched me when you said that, though it took a moment for it to sink in. I almost just blew out the candle right away, as I didn't want to disappoint some pony being nice to me, and after everything I've been thinking for the past few hours there in the park, I had a wish pretty much ready to go, too. But then my thoughts finally caught up to my ears, and I really heard what Dash had just told me. I didn't need some new imaginary friend. I already had friends, and new ponies who cared about me, including one who was really awesome enough to bring me a cupcake even when it wasn't my birthday. When I thought about it like that, I felt guilty for being so self-indulgent. I know lots of ponies had it so much worse than me. My thoughts went to a conversation I had with my mom a few weeks before that when I visited home. We'd been up late talking over tea, and she was telling me how awful she felt for one of her co-workers. The poor mare and her husband had been expecting a foal for months, and they'd been so excited. Mom told me how she'd go on and on about the nursery they were adding, and about the name she was thinking of. Then, about a week before Mom and I were talking... Oh, well, it makes me cry again now just thinking about it. But she had a miscarriage. To make it worse, the doctors told her she'd probably not be able to have another foal again either. Mom was crying as she told me this, and of course I started crying too. It was just so sad. So there I was, a couple of weeks later, feeling sad for myself just because I might fail a class or tripped in front of a couple of ponies who laughed at me. How could I possibly even think of wishing something for myself when my life was so good compared to so many others? Tears started to form in my eyes as I held that cupcake, and Dash was looking impatient, so I took a deep breath to blow out the candle. Like the others, I'm not sure exactly what I wished for. I just know that in that moment, I just wanted that mare and her husband, that broken family. I wanted them to be happy. Wow, Rainbow said. You never told me all of that before. When I asked you what was wrong that day, you only told me about the teacher trying to fail you, and I told you I'd help you sort it out. Well, Fluttershy started to answer. And you wolfed down that cupcake in like 2 seconds. What was that about? Fluttershy blushed a bit. I think that, with all the moping, I may have skipped lunch that day. Classic! Dash said, leaning back and laughing, causing Fluttershy to blush even more. As she calmed down, Pinky suddenly became the centre of attention. I knew it! The pink mare proclaimed, one hoof high in the air, grinning. I told you, 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 she said, dancing around on her hind legs, pointing at each of the other ponies in turn. Told us what? Twilight asked. That's how you get ants! Do what now? Applejack said, as confused as the rest. I told you, you never leave baked goods on a windowsill, because that's how you get ants, and that's how you get ants! I'm still not following here, Sugar Cube. Scootaloo's mom's sister is an aunt, and Scootaloo doesn't have any brothers or sisters. So her mom's sister wasn't an aunt before, but now she is, because Fluttershy made a wish on a cupcake that Rainbow Dash stole because I left it on a windowsill, because Pinky finished her exclamation on 2 knees in the centre of the table, 4 hooves raised to the sky, or rather ceiling, and shouting quite loudly, That's how you get ants! Several seconds of silence followed, wherein Pinky nonchalantly returned to her seat, apparently quite satisfied that she'd made her point. Well, Twilight spoke up, I think that actually all makes sense, in a Pinky sort of way. Most of the ponies in the room chuckled slightly at that, including Pinky, who never passed up a chance to laugh, even at herself. There was one pony that didn't, though. The sniffling sounds coming from the filly behind her made Twilight turn and look down at Scootaloo. The Pegasus had tears in her eyes and was trying to wipe them away with an already soaked fetlock. What's wrong, Scootaloo? Twilight said, once again putting her wing around the filly to comfort her. Scootaloo batted it away and slid herself away from Twilight. That, she said, pointing at Twilight's wing. That's what's wrong. Whatever do you mean, darling? Rarity said, now the closest pony to the filly. I can't fly! The filly choked out between sobs, then pointed an accusing hoof at Fluttershy. I can't fly because she wanted a friend that was bad at flying! Fluttershy was taken aback by this accusation, the possible truth of it knifing straight to her heart. I never meant, Fluttershy stammered out. But you said it! Scootaloo yelled at Fluttershy. "You said you gave me small wings so I'd be bad at flying, just so you could feel better about yourself. Now look at me!" At that, the orange filly reached back and pulled a wing out to full extension with her mouth, demonstrating how stunted it was, then let it slip from her teeth. "I hope you're happy!" By then, Fluttershy was also in tears. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I never meant it to be like that at all." Rarity stood up and spoke loudly. "Of course you didn't, dear. No pony is blaming you for anything." She then turned to Scootaloo just as the filly was about to insist that, yes, she was blaming Fluttershy. "Come here, my dear," she said softly, and pulled the filly into a long hug. "Now," she continued, placing her own face level with Scootaloo, "whatever gave you the idea that small wings would keep you from flying?" Scootaloo looked confused, but the confusion was better than tears, so she took the bait and explained how all the foals at school had bigger wings and could already fly. "Oh, darling, it's not just about wing size," Rarity said. "But what about—" "Shh! Just listen for a minute. Let me explain. Now, who do you think is the better flyer here? Rainbow Dash or Fluttershy?" Scootaloo thought this had to be some sort of trick question, but answered anyway. "Well, Rainbow Dash, duh." "I see," Rarity said cryptically. "And how about between Twilight and Rainbow Dash?" Scootaloo actually snickered. She'd seen the newly ascended Alicorn fall on her face several times as Dash has been giving her flight lessons. "Dash, of course." "Interesting," Rarity said, walking over to a set of drawers in the corner of the room. "Twilight, may I?" The aforementioned Alicorn thought she knew where Rarity might be going with this, and nodded. With that, Rarity levitated a rolled strip of cloth out and walked over to Twilight. By then, most of the other ponies in the room were nearly as confused as Scootaloo. "Now, dear," Rarity said, addressing Twilight, "if you'd be so kind." Twilight smiled and stood up, before stretching out her wings to full extension. Rarity unrolled the strip, revealing it to be a tape measure, and took measurements of both the overall span as well as the length of each wing, making small ticks on the tape to record things. She, of course, already knew these measurements quite well, as she'd tailored several new dresses for Twilight's coronation. This show was merely for the benefit of the now wide-eyed Pegasus filly. With the measurements complete, Twilight folded her wings and sat back at the table. "Fluttershy, would you please step over here for a moment?" The yellow Pegasus demurely trotted around the table and spread her wings as well, although she was afraid to look Scootaloo in the eye, the accusations the filly had levelled still burning fresh in her mind. "Thank you, dear," Rarity said, finishing her measurements and returning to Scootaloo. "If you look here, you can see the Fluttershy's wings are only an inch or so shorter than Twilight's. As Twilight's an Alicorn, though, that's actually quite impressive. Still, though, I think we can agree that they are both, well, no offence, dearies, but less than stellar flyers, yes?" Rarity knew she was probably hurting Fluttershy's feelings slightly with that remark, but it was for the greater good, and she'd make it up to her later. "Ha! I know I certainly am," Twilight said. Rarity smiled, glad to see Twilight taking the attention off the shy Pegasus. "And of course," Rarity continued, "we all know that Rainbow Dash is at least, I believe it's 20% cooler, correct?" Applejack snickered at the subtle jab, but it went right over Scootaloo's head, so she just responded, "Yeah, at least 20% cooler. So then, I imagine we should expect her wings to be at least 20% larger, yes?" Scootaloo, to her credit, was starting to catch on to where this might be going. Her own stubbornness and unwavering adoration of Dash won out, though, and she wasn't going to back down this far in. Sure," the filly said, then amended. "If you, also, take weight and stuff into account?" Rarity laughed, actually pleased to see the filly thinking a bit more critically now. Well, that and a certain mental image that, by the fearful look in her eye, Twilight had as well. Rarity realised she probably could make it happen too. None of the winged ponies in the room would dare say no while she was trying to help a scared filly, but no, pranks like that really belong more to Pinky, and this wasn't the time anyway. "Don't worry, girls," she said, looking especially at Twilight. "I'm not going to put you all upon scales." The relief on Twilight's face was quite evident, and Rarity knew the librarian had been feeling rather shy and awkward about her new Alicorn-related growth spurt. "That said," she continued, "I can assure you that Fluttershy does weigh less than Rainbow Dash without going into details, so weight shouldn't be a concern, yes?" realizing Rarity was waiting on her approval. Scootaloo nodded agreement. Right then, Rarity said. Dash, darling, if you'd step this way, please. Rainbow trotted around the table to the clearing. For her part, she wasn't exactly sure about this either. She'd never been self-conscious about the size of her wings before, but now that Rarity was making a fuss over it, she really didn't like the idea of being compared to her friends. From the way Rarity was acting, she knew her wings probably couldn't be as big as Twilight's alicorn wings. That was okay though, wasn't it? No pony had wings as big as the princess's, so they didn't really count. But Rarity also said Fluttershy's were almost as big, and that was probably bad. There was only, a 1-inch margin between the other two for her to fit in? And she couldn't have the largest wings, unless she was completely misunderstanding the point Rarity was trying to make with Scootaloo. But what if she was wrong? And her thoughts were interrupted by a polite cough from Rarity. Rainbow looked up and saw the unicorn nodding at her still folded wings. Oh, right, have to actually open them, she thought. As she did so, she wondered what the results would be. She didn't want to lose, but this wasn't something she could just try harder at. Relax, dear, Rarity said. It's not a contest. Rainbow Dash realized her wings were actually twitching as she strained and stretched them as far as possible and forced herself to just stop thinking about it and relax. A few moments later, Rarity was done and Dash returned to her seat. Rarity held the tape out in front of her, presenting it to Scootaloo for inspection. So, as you can see, not only are Dash's wings not 20% larger than Fluttershy's or Twilight's, they're actually around 10% smaller. At that, Dash looked almost more surprised than Scootaloo, stretching out one wing and turning her head to stare at it in disbelief. Seeing this, Rarity turned to Dash. As I said, it's not a contest. She then turned back to Scootaloo and continued, and as I was trying to explain to you, a Pegasus's wing size has very little to do with their ability to fly. Much more important, as Rainbow Dash clearly demonstrates, are things like determination, skill, finesse, and practice. It's all about how you manipulate the air around you. There are fully grown Pegasi with wings smaller than yours are now, and they're able to fly just fine. You just have to have patience. You'll get there eventually, I promise. At this, she put a hoof around the young filly and drew her into another hug, which Scootaloo eagerly returned. So I'm not broken? Scootaloo said. No, darling, I promise you, you'll be just fine. So your wings are small, Applebloom chimed in, trying to cheer her friend up as well. So what? At least you're not a mud monster. Yeah, Sweetie Belle added, or a robot with glowing blue goop for blood. Wait a minute, Rainbow Dash interjected. Your blood glows blue? Sweetie wasn't sure where this was going and hesitantly responded, yeah, it does. That is so awesome! Sweetie replied, still confused. Thanks, I guess. I can't really speak to awesome, Twilight said, but it is definitely fascinating. Would you mind if I, took a small sample? Of my blood? I promise you'll barely feel it. Applebloom and Scootaloo too, so I can compare things properly. The Cutie Mark Crusaders looked at Twilight with more than a little apprehension. Please, girls, Twilight said, begging. For science? Okay, I guess. Applebloom was the first to give in. Then Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo nodded affirmation shortly afterwards. Oh, thank you, I'll be right back, Twilight said, speeding off to the basement and returning a moment later with a set of vials and needles. The Alicorn librarian quickly took small samples from each of the young fillies. Every pony in the room oohed and awed at the blue glow from Sweetie's sample. Only Twilight seemed to be equally enthused by the mud and water-like samples from the other two. Wow, this is fascinating, Twilight said as she scanned and probed the samples using her magic. All three of these are full of latent magic at a level I've never seen. She turned to Sweetie and continued, Now, this one is the most obvious. It's unicorn magic, and that makes perfect sense given that you are both a unicorn, and that if the story is correct, the original clockwork was made by a talented unicorn as well. The other two, well... Twilight then turned to Applebloom. I may completely have missed this one even last year before I got my wings. Earth pony magic is very subtle, and I've only learned how to properly sense and use it since I became an alicorn. That said, it's still very, very strong. It seems to literally be made of earth itself. You mean mud? Applebloom said. I guess you could call it that. But it's so much more, too. Now, Scootaloo, Twilight said, turning towards the Pegasus, your blood is similarly charged. In fact, it looks like some thaumaturgical component even behaves as a clotting agent. Absolutely fascinating. Possibly essential, too, given that otherwise the sample appears to be nothing but water. You're saying my blood has magic in it? Oh, yes, it's amazingly dense with latent Pegasus magic. But, Scootaloo said, how can that be? Pegasi don't have magic. Of course they do, Twilight replied, somewhat confused how a Pegasus could not know this. Rarity simply put her hoof to her forehead and sighed, before bending down once more to eye level with the young Pegasus, who was looking more confused than ever. Oh, darling, that's the point I was trying to make earlier. Pegasus flight isn't based on wings or their size. It's a Pegasus's inner magic. The same thing that lets them walk on clouds, resist lightning strikes, control the weather, and build things like Cloudsdale. That same magic is whatever lets a Pegasus fly as well. No pony's wings would ever be big enough to even lift them off the ground without it. Scootaloo looked sceptical, and Twilight, not one to pass up a chance to enlighten, jumped in. It's true. Look at butterflies, or birds, and... Wait just a second. Twilight turned and trotted upstairs, returning a moment later with a rather groggy-looking owl perched on her back. Owloicious, would you please spread your wings for a moment? Whew, was all the bird replied. You, and yes, I know you're tired, and I'm sorry for waking you, but this will only take a moment. The owl opened one eye a bit wider, as though he was considering another word, but thought better of it. The sooner this was over, the sooner he could go back to sleep, so he spread his wings wide. Beneath him, Twilight did the same. As you can see, his wingspan is not much less than my own, but his body is much, much smaller and lighter, as it has to be to fly without any magic. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, Scootaloo said. I mean, that one time we tried hang gliding, the glider was way, way bigger than any Pegasus wings, and we still crashed. Twilight laughed a bit nervously. How exactly did these fillies keep getting into such outlandish and often dangerous scenarios? That was a problem for another time, though. For now, she dismissed the owl and continued. So you see, a Pegasus's control of their inner magic is the most essential thing to flight. That only comes with practice and discipline, as they learn to manipulate the air around them in conjunction with their wings. Wait a minute, Rainbow Dash interjected, something just now occurring to her. Why are the two unicorns the one telling a Pegasus how to fly when you've got the best flyer in Equestria right here? Rarity felt her ire rise instantly, and before any pony could blink, she had turned, pointed her hoof directly at Dash, and through gritted teeth was sputtering, "Because you..." Realizing she was about to become even louder if she didn't control herself, the white unicorn forced herself to take a couple of deep breaths, and waited for her eye to stop twitching with frustration before she continued. "Because you," she said, this time in a much more civilized tone, "have apparently failed to do so." "What do you mean?" Dash said, confused. "I've been taking Scoots out to flying lessons all the time." Rarity took another calming breath. "Yes," she said, "then I suppose you've explained this all to her. How she needs to find and center her magic, focus on the air around her wings, make it denser in places, thin it in others, synchronize that it pulses in match with wing beats, and deflect the rest around her body to lower drag." Dash said, perplexed. "You don't have to do all that. You just have to push off, flap your wings, and just kind of feel the air around you." "And if that doesn't work," Rarity said, "well, you just have to try harder." Rarity sighed. "Try harder. Is that all you've been telling her at those flight lessons?" "Well, I showed her a lot of cool tricks and the moves in each one. Oh, and we went through the rules for like all 4 of the main racing leagues." Rarity just glared at the Cyan Pegasus, who at least had the sense to look abashed at her attempted excuse. "She's right, Squirt," Rainbow said, looking down at Scootaloo after she couldn't face Rarity's gaze any longer. "Maybe I'm not the best teacher. I mean, it's all just instinct for me. I never had to properly learn it. I just did it." "But," Scootaloo said, "you're the best. You're like the only pony ever that can do a sonic rainboom." "Yeah," Rainbow said, rubbing the back of her head, "but, I don't even know how I do it. I just try harder, like Rarity said." Rarity started to smile, glad to see Dash understanding and acquiescing a bit. "That reminds me," Dash said, turning to the unicorn. How do you know so much about Pegasus flight? Curiosity, dear. Twilight's not the only one that reads books, you know. Hey, Rainbow said, I read books. At this, Twilight and Rarity both smirked. I do! You've seen me! I read like all 6 Daring Do books that came out this year! Twilight and Rarity just grinned wider, as did the rest of the mares in the room. Scootaloo, however, looked positively shocked. Wait, she said, you like books? Realising she was bragging about something she'd only mocked a couple years ago, gave Rainbow pause, before even she herself appreciated the irony of the situation and started laughing. Yeah, I do actually, she admitted, both to herself and Scootaloo. But seriously, Rares, what made you read a book about Pegasus flight? Well, Rarity said, if you must know, it was while I was dating that handsome Pegasus stallion. I asked him one time what it was like to fly, and well, he was not much one for words. The next time I saw him, however, he loaned me a book on it. Quicksilver's Feathers and Flight, I believe it was. Spike! Twilight yelled. Where did we put? Already on it, the young dragon said. His much more civilized volume still easily heard as he left his spot only a foot away from the alicorn. After a quick climb up the shelves, Spike returned with the mentioned tome. Thank you, Spike, Twilight said. And sorry for the yelling. I didn't realise you... Yeah, Spike said, waving a dismissive claw. The slight grin on his face betrayed his otherwise offended tone of voice. No pony ever notices the noble, ferocious, fire-breathing dragon mere inches from their hooves. Twilight giggled softly as she placed the book on the table and leafed through a few pages. Yes, she said, I think this may be the best introduction. I reread it a few months ago myself. Obviously I'm no expert, but it did help me get off the ground. So, Scootaloo said, you're telling me you learned how to fly from a book? Have you met Twilight? Rainbow said jovially. Of course she did. She probably learned how to breathe from a book. Yes, ha, Dash, Twilight said, but in all seriousness, I found it very helpful. I'm not saying it made me an expert, but it let me know what I needed to work on at the very least. Yes, Squirt, Dash said, her voice taking on a more encouraging tone. You should listen to her and Rares on this. They might be eggheads, but they usually know what they're talking about. Besides, once you figure out the basics their way, then I can really show you some awesome tricks. Really? The filly said, still uncertain that her athletic idol was trying to get her to read a book. Really? I mean, after everything we just figured out, it turns out I'm kinda like the stork that dropped you off after all, and I can't let any pony that close to me be anything less than totally awesome. But reading an entire book? You're not gonna let one measly book stand between you and the skies, right? Scootaloo knew she was trapped now. Of course she wanted to fly, more than pretty much anything. But her reading a book that wasn't forced on her by school. On the other hoof, if even Dash liked books now, they couldn't be that bad, right? Okay, the filly said, I'll give it a try. Excellent, Twilight said, clapping her forehoofs together. Now let's see, do you have a library card? No? Well, no matter. Let me just get the right forms over... Twilight, Applejack said. Yes, AJ? Twilight said, oblivious. The farm pony coughed. Nodding down at the once again hesitant filly, Twilight realised what Applejack was suggesting. It violated every aspect of what library procedure should be, but she knew her friend was right. It was just a book. She didn't have to be a stickler for the rules all the time, even if it was painful to break them. You know what? Twilight said. Never mind all that. You just take the book and bring it back when you're done, okay? At this, Scootaloo nodded. Hey, Rainbow Dash said, nudging the filly with one wing. What do you say? Scootaloo sighed, but dutifully replied, Thank you, Miss Sparkle. Twilight smiled. You're very welcome, Scootaloo, and if you have any questions, you can always come talk to me, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, any of the girls here. Yes, darling, Rarity added. We'll be delighted to help any way we can. That goes for you two as well, Twilight said, nodding towards Sweetabelle and Applebloom. I know you both have sisters here, but if you ever need help practicing your magic or anything, I'm here. Thanks, Twilight, the fillies chorused in monotone, although they were actually all smiling by this point. You're welcome, girls. Now, would any pony like... Twilight's sentence faded out as she caught sight of Pinky once again vibrating up and down, grinning ear to ear again. Pinky? Something you want to share? Again? I'm just so happy, the pink bird said. I gave away 3 wishes, and now there's like 9 ponies and a dragon in this room alone, all happier because of it. And then, of course, there's Scootaloo's parents and aunts who all smile more having her in their lives, and the big humongous Apple family all laugh more often because Apple Bloom is around, and of course, Sweetie's parents and their family can't help but be happy whenever they hear her sing. And then there's all their friends and friends of friends and their friends, and even that one male pony they helped that time, and whoever got that letter instead of having it lost has got to be happier. And so out in that big, wide, crazy, amazing world, there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds, or even thousands of more ponies whose lives are happier. See, I told you wishes are unlimited. You just have to give them away, and then they multiply everywhere. Knowing that so many other ponies are happier is the most bestest thing ever. I don't know if there's anything that could possibly make me happier than I am right now. Well, Twilight said, smiling deeply, both at the amazing selflessness of her friend, but also because she spotted a weakness she knew she could exploit. I was about to ask if any pony would like another round of cocoa before heading out. And for once, Pinkie Pie was finally proven to be wrong about something. Smiling as she licked foam and a miniature marshmallow off the tip of her nose, however, she didn't seem to mind too much. Later that evening, Applejack was escorting her sister back to the farm. So, Apple Bloom said, I didn't bring it up back there, as Scootaloo was so upset, but I still don't think I understand what Earth Pony Magic's supposed to be. Do all of us have it? Applejack thought for a moment as the two continued along the road. Well, of course we do. Us Earth ponies, it ain't flashy like with unicorns. There's no glowy levitating and big spells or nothing. It's just like twice said, subtle. What you mean by that exactly? Well, take apple bucking for instance. Most ponies might watch and think it's all about strength. They think I just kick a tree really hard. Now, of course I do kick mighty hard, but you can't just knock every apple out of a tree in one go with brute force. You can't? Well, I suppose with enough force you could do almost anything, well, there's a connection with the trees themselves. You can kind of sense it, knowing where to put your hooves and the angles and all that. When you hit the trunk, it's almost like you make a connection with the tree itself for a moment, and it knows you want it to let go of all the ripe apples it's been holding for you. So that's why I can't get all them apples out like you do. Heh, well, Sugar Cube, you're still mighty small, too. It ain't all about force, but it does take a fair bit of it, even with the finesse. So how do you learn to do that finesse stuff? It ain't just about bucking things, Apple Bloom. It's about all the Earth Pony stuff, planting and growing things especially. You know that feeling you get when you walk along a creek bank in spring? How everything just feels like it's ready to explode into life? Apple Bloom pondered this for a minute. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Or when you walk past the trees in winter, you can feel a bit of life coming from each. It's almost like you know they're sleeping, waiting for the warmth to come back. I always thought that was just in my head or something. Well, it is in a way, but it's also a real thing in the world. As I said, it's a subtle thing. You can learn to pay more attention to it, though. Really? Could you teach me how? Easy there, sis. I mean, there ain't that much to teach. As much as I hate sounding like Rainbow, it's just something you have to feel for yourself. Apple Bloom looked dejected at this. Well then, she said, how's an Earth Pony ever supposed to learn this stuff? Just work on it. Let yourself be aware of the life around you. Think about it when you walk past flowers and fields. Try to feel it more. It'll come to you. There ain't an apple been born yet that didn't find a strong connection with the earth neath her hooves. Apple Bloom sighed, hanging her head. What's the matter, not the answer you're looking for? Not really. I mean, come on, sis. That all sounds like a bunch of hokey-pokey junk. Would you like it better if I told you could gain all your Earth Pony magic if you danced around a maypole 5 times on a full moon while chanting an ancient Earth Pony rite? Really? Apple Bloom said, looking up with excitement. Applejack laughed. No, sorry there, A.B. There ain't no shortcuts like that in the real world. You just have to work at it like every other Earth Pony has since the start of time. But I ain't a normal Earth Pony, Apple Bloom objected. Applejack looked at her sister, unsure exactly how to respond to that at first, but eventually decided to keep the mood light. Well, she said, there's a couple of poles for the old tent in the barn if you really feel like dancing. Apple Bloom just snorted and rolled her eyes. And we are done. Everybody has their origins now. And so, yeah. So we had the Scarecrow Pony, the Clockwork Pony, and now we have the Cloud Pony. So, All three birthed unnaturally through wishes, and Pinkie Pie is pleased as punch about this. Well, another heartwarming chapter, and as always, it feels very in character, and I enjoy trying to at least do some voices for them. It's been a while, so if any are different to before, then I apologise. But yeah, oh my gosh, this takes a lot out of you. I forgot about this. Oh. This is full of a lot of retakes and because I kept getting tongued up. But yeah, I think that'll do me for now. I'm looking forward to chapter 4 and seeing where the story progresses. And I will see you guys next time.